Hello everyone! So 2020 is now upon us, and like last year, I wanted to start things off slow and simple and do a fun little Q&A because I'm actually pretty curious to see what you guys want to know more about because I've covered a lot in my videos, but there are certainly many topics that I haven't ever talked about, so this is a chance to get the questions there, get some specific answers, and this is just a thing YouTubers do also, because sometimes you're just lazy and you just want to make a simple video. I'm sorry, I'm exposing the artifice. Sometimes YouTubers are just lazy. And if you're wondering about the accent nail, this is not a common fashion choice for me, but I went out to a bar with some friends last night and, well, there was nail polish there at the bar, and my friend works there, and he just started painting our nails, so that's the life I lead. The first question is favorite 2019 moment. That would definitely be when we wrapped filming on my thesis film because I had spent over a year writing and rewriting and planning and obsessing over and very much stressing over that project. And every aspect of it. So to have it all wrapped in the actually pretty quick time we got it all filmed, it was just the biggest feeling of relief I've ever felt, and it's actually come together really well. I'm really excited about it. What school do you do? Well, I'm a fourth-year film student, currently in my last semester, which is very terrifying and surprising because I still remember moving into res in first year, so I don't know how I got here, but I guess I did okay. My degree and the program I've been in since the beginning is pretty theory-based, although there have been a lot of production and practical courses you can do along with that, and I've very much pivoted more towards that now at the end of my university career, trying to get more on-set experience, making our own work, making fun projects, doing some videography work, and just trying to get a sense of every aspect of film production and finding what I'm really good at and where I want to keep pushing myself. I have learned so much about film, not as much about filmmaking as I expected, but that just wasn't quite the program, so I don't think I'm gonna pursue any more school in terms of filmmaking specific courses or programs in terms of grad school, but I'm definitely going to keep pushing myself to get into the industry in whatever way I can, even if it means making my own work and just kind of hoping it works out, because that seems to be what a lot of people do at this point in their lives. Have you seen The Boys on Amazon? If you have, what did you think about it, and have you read the original graphic novels? Also, good luck on your thesis film. Well, thank you for the luck. I'll need it, yep. I have seen and read The Boys. I'll start with the show. I think it's phenomenal, probably the best piece of superhero media in the last decade, I think. Definitely the best show for superheroes in the last decade. It's subversive, it's entertaining, it's hilarious, it's the right amount of gory and over the top, because the comics are very over the top in pretty much every aspect, and I think in terms of adaptation, it's really interesting to see not only how the story has been restructured and different story elements are treated so differently, and I think the show is actually a much better approach, or at least in terms of the interesting stuff for the comics that I like how they're approaching it in the world of the show much more, especially Compound V and the origin of superheroes, but also comparing the political landscape and the pop culture landscape and how superheroes would realistically factor in the early 2000s and the late 2010s are very different places. And I think both the show and the comics capture the attitudes, the humor, and the satire that comes from how prevalent superheroes are in media in both time periods. And I'm very excited to see where the show goes in the future, because it's going off script from the comics, and I think as long as it can keep up the level of quality it's going for and just telling interesting stories with these characters, because I find the characters really compelling, and I think the actors are amazing. I'm really just excited to see more, and I don't know if they'll weave back into the comic storyline here and there. I assume they will, but if they do with Butcher in the show what they did with him in the comics, I think that would be a really interesting way to take that in the final season, whenever that may be. I think the producers and showrunners were very smart about using the very prevalent amount of sex and violence and nudity and gore from the comics and adapting that into the show in a realistic way where it can still be shocking and surprising to see that in superhero media, but not overdoing it so much that you get numb to it, because I would say the greatest weakness of the comics was that it kept pushing those transgressive boundaries like too far. Like Garth Ennis was clearly just doing whatever he wanted, and it's a fun read, but I feel like in a TV show you have to have some more restraint and make those moments really hit, and so far the show's done just a fantastic job of it. Favorite comic book ever? This is a tough one because I don't read a whole lot of comics, so I guess I'll go for the cliche answer and say Watchmen, because you know, when you write something that perfect, and every time I go back to it, I find new levels of just brilliance in terms of satirizing and celebrating superhero comics. And I don't absorb really any of the Watchmen side media. I haven't read any of the before Watchmen comics or Doomsday Clock or anything. I haven't actually watched the new show either, although I've heard great things and I'm hoping to get to it soon. I just have very little free time right now. So hopefully when I have a long stretch of hours, I can just sit down and watch all of Watchmen, because I'm really curious about it, especially since, you know, it got such amazingly good reviews and everyone seemed to say it was the best new thing in TV. So that's appealing, obviously. But yeah, from the first time to the 10th time I read Watchmen, I never loved it any less or felt any less invested and shocked and surprised and just engaged in that story, and I love that world very much. And I also like self-contained stories quite a bit. It's actually where I'm moving to more when I'm reading comics. I'm moving away from the big superhero universes because I feel like I'm always missing something and I can't quite keep up, and it's expensive to keep up. But I just read through all the Hellboy comics, through The Boys, through Preacher, and I'm just going to start reading Saga soon, hopefully. So those self-contained little universes are far more appealing to me, because I like the comic medium a lot, and I'm very much a completionist, and with the big superhero comics, I've just found the more they go on, the less I care, and when you have a more focused story, it seems to start and end on a similar level of quality. Not always, obviously, but I'm usually much more satisfied with some independent projects in that way. But also, the Scott Snyder run of Batman from the New 52 is absolutely fantastic, and if you like Batman at all, you should read that. What did you think of the movie Ready or Not, and have you ever considered making your own version of the Oscars? I absolutely loved Ready or Not. It was one of my favorite movies of last year. If you want to hear more concise and actually written out beforehand thoughts on that movie, go watch that video now. But with the Oscars question, it's actually pretty interesting. I have thought about it because the name The Roskers is just such an obvious pun. It's like it's waiting for me to use it. But I think if I were to do some sort of like my equivalent of the Oscars, I wouldn't want it to be a direct one-to-one like Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, all that. I would want it to be more of a comedic thing, more of a parody, making up fun categories and celebrating the good and bad of the year, and making it feel different every year, because my opinions can be so fluid on what I like in terms of what I think is the best performance of a year or the best movie. Like day by day that can change. And I think people should realize that more and more, that opinions should be more fluid in that way. But that doesn't really fly on film YouTube that much. What was your favorite video to make? That would have to be the Riverdale quiz video, just because of how much fun I had bringing my friends in and writing it and making the slideshow and setting it up in James's living room. It was a great fun morning to shoot. And editing was pretty simple. I learned a lot about how I'd want to do more quiz videos like that in the future, and hopefully we can, because it was a lot of fun. It was also just fun to break free of the video essay format for a bit, because those do get a bit tedious to edit after a while, and the process just feels kind of samey. Like, writing my videos is my favorite part of making my videos, so to have something fun to film and edit, a little challenge, just a splash of variety in there is good, and I'm hoping to do more stuff like that in the future. I don't know quite what it'll be, but that was just a very spur-of-the-moment idea that I got some friends on board for, and it was a great time to make. Thoughts on The Crown? My mom loves it. What movies are you most excited for in 2020, good and bad? I keep a list on my phone of all the movies in a given year that I want to see and are coming up. I haven't updated this one too much yet. It's just pretty much any movie of note, so I can't really pick out specific ones I want to see, but the three I would say I'm most curious about this year are Sonic the Hedgehog, The Personal History of David Copperfield, because I love Armando Iannucci, and also The Kingsman, because I really like Matthew Vaughn. I loved the first Kingsman, really didn't love the second one, so hopefully he can bring it back and use that unique crazy, wacky style in a new setting, in a new way, and bring the Kingsman franchise back on track. Because I would love for that franchise to just take off and take over the world. Because I like big action franchises. I feel like there aren't enough. We got like John Wick and nothing else I care about. What are your thoughts on the James Bond film series? Well, they're very limited because I've actually only seen Skyfall and Spectre and most of Casino Royale, but not start to finish, so I can't fully judge it as a good or bad movie. I don't know. Spy movies just never really were something I got into. Same way with horror movies. I feel like if you get into them young, you can really like them, but I haven't seen a lot of spy action movies besides the Kingsman movies, which are pretty satirical of those movies that I really enjoyed and want to seek out more of. So James Bond has always just been kind of a cinematic blind spot for me. I do want to sit down and binge my way through them and maybe do a video chronicling that. So that could be a fun thing in the future. Maybe this year, maybe next year, who knows? So I guess to be concise, my thoughts are I'm curious to check them out one day, hopefully soon. What is your most highly recommended TV show or movie? You said or, so I'm only going to pick one, and that would be Mr. Robot, because that show is just start to finish perfection. I have never seen a TV show be so good, reinvent itself so many times, and keep raising the bar for creativity in filmmaking in TV, in writing, in relying purely on metaphor and just nailing it every single time. I will scream my love for Mr. Robot from the rooftops until the end of time. I may make a big video about it soon because I can't stop thinking about it. The finale was just so wonderful. I always dread TV series finales because they can break your heart a little bit, and Mr. Robot's broke mine in the right way, where I was happy to see it go because I knew it could not get any better. It was so right. And that's what you want. You want a satisfying end to a journey, even if it's only 4 seasons, which isn't that long in the grand scheme of things. You want that satisfying ending, and Mr. Robot just did it above and beyond. Also, a note to all TV executives, if Sam Esmail approaches you with an idea, just make it and let him do whatever he wants. He can do no wrong in my book. How do you feel about quality music? What do you think is good music? Well, I am absolutely the wrong person to ask this question because music is probably my greatest artistic blind spot. I know nothing about music at all. I will listen to anything that I find mildly catchy. I usually listen to a lot of 80s pop and like modern indie rock stuff, just because it all has a sound I like. I find it relaxing. I listen to it when I edit, that sort of thing. I don't get too into the theory of it and criticizing it. It's just if I like a song, I like it, and if I don't like it, I don't. A few songs I would recommend if you want some recommendations from me would be Suburban Wonderland by Between Friends. Love that song, absolutely. If I Was Only a Poet, I think that's the title. If I Only Was, or If I Was Only a Poet, I always forget that, by Staffan Karlin, I think is how you pronounce it. Really good song too. And 2 songs. I know 2 good songs. I'm an expert. Ever played Ocarina of Time or any Zelda for that matter? If so, what do you think? And has Riverdale gotten better in its enjoyment? I haven't played any of the old Zelda games or really any of the old Nintendo properties, like the classic ones, like any of the straight up Mario games or Zelda games or Samus or anything like that. Donkey Kong, nothing. Smash Brothers is probably the closest I got. I never was really into video games when I was a kid. I was a big reader, and when we eventually got Nintendo Wii for Christmas, I think it was in 07 or 08 Christmas, when the Wii was the biggest thing in the world. I think it may have been a year after that. I don't know. Doesn't matter. I mostly just played Star Wars games and Wii Sports, so I never really got into it. Just Smash Brothers is the only real in-depth Zelda experience I had, because I always mained Link when I was a kid. I loved Link, so I do have a connection to it. And with Riverdale, absolutely. Riverdale remains the most entertaining show on television by far, the most unpredictable by a wide margin. You never know what it's going to do next, and I am excited every week because I know I will get at least 1 or maybe 5 lines of dialogue that make me laugh harder than any intentional joke. So I cannot get enough of it. I love it so dearly. Why did you delete your Paul Blart video? Funny story, I actually didn't. I unlisted it, which is sort of the same thing, but not quite, because I think it's a bad video, and I don't want people to see it when they come to my channel. There you go. Do you think that miscommunication among directors was a big factor in why there was so much backlash to The Last Jedi, and why Rise of Skywalker seems to be retconning The Last Jedi? I couldn't help but notice that Rise of Skywalker was backing away from that movie. No, I don't think it was miscommunication among directors. I think it was more a problem with cowardice of the producers, because Rise of Skywalker was just clearly trying so hard to be liked by its audience, as opposed to telling a story that naturally escalated off of its own prequel, or precursor, not prequel, but you know what I mean. Yeah, it kind of just made everything up as it went along and just kept throwing Star Wars stuff at you, and that felt very much like a producer decision and a studio decision, because The Last Jedi had quite a lot of backlash, but not enough to warrant, I think, completely restructuring your entire series, especially going in such a pandering, empty direction that it ended up in. So, no, I wouldn't blame the directors for that. I mean, I would blame one director for that. It would be J.J. Abrams, but I wouldn't say that a miscommunication between him and Rian Johnson is the reason why Rise of Skywalker is the way it is. I think people didn't like a movie and they were very loud about it, and they went, okay, everything that guy did is meaningless now, throw it in the trash. And I feel really bad for Rian Johnson for that, because he clearly put his heart and soul into the movie, and it wasn't perfect, but it was something watchable. Do you think that any of the Game of Thrones spin-offs / prequels have potential? Yeah, of course they have potential. You know, I think it depends entirely on who comes on board to run it, the stories they choose to approach with it. I wish, I don't know this for sure, I actually think it's not going to happen, but I wish that the shows will focus more on the characters' interplay and the politics, you know, where Game of Thrones kind of started out, as opposed to the giant battles in which it ended. So hopefully they can maybe strike a good balance and make those battles feel more meaningful, if that's going to be the tone of the Game of Thrones extended TV universe, whatever they call it in the end, they'll call it something. But yeah, I think the world of Game of Thrones has so much potential already, even with the last season ending on a bit of a low note for fans and viewers and critics and everyone. Not everyone, that's not fair. But I think the world will sustain a few good stories as long as you have good storytellers telling them, obviously. But yeah, there is endless potential to be found in that universe, and bringing in more magic, doing more battles, or just keeping it really locked down to family interplay, I'm down for any of it, and I hope to see all of it. But also, I would really love The Winds of Winter. That would be lovely too. Also a sequel to Fire and Blood. That was fantastic. Just George R. R. Martin can do whatever he wants on the book scale of things. He knows how to write. He's pretty good at it, and pretty successful, modestly, but he's doing all right for himself. What is your opinion on Joker? Okay, here we go. Joker is fine. I thought it was okay. I liked Joaquin Phoenix's performance a lot. I thought the visual style of it was very striking, and there were a lot of memorable images because of that. The colors being very muted, the production design being very grungy and nasty. I liked all that stuff a lot. But the story it didn't really do anything for me. The themes didn't really hit home, and everything was so surface level and obvious that I had trouble connecting with it, and I really don't get the overwhelming positive praise it's getting. I mean, I do on some level. I don't want to be derogatory here, because there's no right way to watch or absorb a film, but like, if you think Joker is the best movie you've ever seen, I would just encourage you to watch more movies, because there are movies, including the ones that Joker directly rips off, like Taxi Driver and King of Comedy, that do these things a lot better and a lot more consistently. Joker, to me, just feels like the kind of movie that is designed for people who don't watch a lot of movies, like the kind of person who sees 5 movies a year in theaters and goes like, yeah, I'm a film buff. But yeah, I really have no strong feelings one way or the other. I'm glad to see Joaquin Phoenix getting some real recognition. He's always been a phenomenal actor, though. Like, this is not even his best performance. I would still say Her is his best performance, or at least my favorite. I do have to watch a few more of his filmography, but I love him as an actor. He never does a bad job. But this is not the new Dark Knight. This is not a new paradigm shift. It will probably influence the industry and what comic book movies we see over the next decade, kind of like how Venom was reacting to that dark and gritty trend. But yeah, I forgot most of Joker the next morning, and I still barely remember it, aside from a few, like I said, very striking visual images. So thumbs up to the director of photography, but everything else, just fine. Has the idea that one day, eventually, people will run out of good stories to tell and that movies and television shows will lose their current appeal entirely ever occurred to you? Does it scare you? No, not at all. Because if I want to be, artsy about it and film studenty about it, I would say that all of the movies and TV shows we see are based around human experience. That is the baseline for why we go and experience these stories. We want relatability or exploring something new. And so, as our cultures and societies collectively all around the world, because films are made all around the world and they keep getting changed and remade, and the way we approach them gets remade. New technology will allow us to do new things, but new human experiences will always drive new stories forward, and there will always be new, interesting voices who want to tell those stories. So I would say, in terms of this doomsday scenario in which we just run out of stories, I think the only way that happens is if an apocalypse happens or the entire industry just crumbles overnight, because people like to tell these stories, and that's the medium we chose, the medium we love, the medium we experience, and on the part of the audience and the filmmaker, it's hard to stop. Do you think Rotten Tomatoes is reliable, or do you think it's better to judge movies and TV shows on one's own? Of course, it's better to judge things on one's own. That is the obvious answer. I think the big problem here is a lot of people don't actually know what Rotten Tomatoes is for. It is not some arbitrary number that a bunch of critics slap on a movie and it is 80% good or 18% good. It's just math. It is how many people gave a positive or negative review of something. And it's that simple. The problem is nobody's really reading the fine print and going in and seeing what scores critics are actually giving these movies. They just read the big number and react based on that. So you have to investigate a little bit. But that's more for film because those reviews are easier to track. When it comes to TV, never trust Rotten Tomatoes unless it's universally negative, in which case you can probably bet it's not going to be very good because, TV critics can still tell that much. But for the most part, TV critics will review like the first 3 episodes of something, and again, you'll get an above average or below average rating based on that. So if that's the way you're approaching it and you see 80% of people liked the first 3 episodes of this show, that is not at all a way to indicate quality. You have to just kind of watch it for your own. So I'd say for movies, understand Rotten Tomatoes first of all, and then use it properly. And with TV shows, ignore it entirely. It's really not worth using for that. What is your coping mechanism for seeing the same question about the Arrowverse every time you look through your comment section? Bourbon. I've been considering watching Game of Thrones since I've never seen it before. However, simply by living in the world and being on the internet, I'm well aware of the decline in quality that happens in later seasons. In your video about Season 8, you said that Seasons 1 through 4 were the best of the show before it started to decline. Is it possible to just watch those seasons and feel satisfied, or is it one of the shows where you will never feel satisfied unless you finish it? Well, first of all, like I just said, watch it for yourself. Don't go off what I say. I was just sharing my opinion about the show because I felt very passionate about it. I know a lot of people who think the entire show follows a very consistent line of quality, and you may find that as well. I think in terms of watching only Seasons 1 through 4, it'd be more of an interesting thought experiment, because when you think about where Season 4 ends with, Jon's story with Ygritte kind of coming full circle with the battle, and Arya heading off into the unknown, and also Tyrion heading off into an uncertain future, if you treat the series like it ended there, you could have a somewhat compelling finale. Obviously, there's lots still in the air, and that's what future seasons did to varying degrees of competence, but yeah, I would definitely recommend the show overall, if only to understand why it was such a big cultural phenomenon, because you may watch it and then find out, oh, I hate this from the beginning. That also happens. I'm a completionist by nature, especially with TV, which is why I'm slowly watching less and less TV, because I find I just can't commit the time or energy because things usually disappoint me. Maybe that's more of a me problem, but then you have Mr. Robot, which again is the best thing ever made. Game of Thrones is actually a really interesting test for this question because there are still the books being produced, allegedly, so there is a version of the story that has yet to be completed. This is just one version, so I think if you get invested in the world and in the characters, and that prompts you to read the books, which I absolutely highly recommend, then yeah, see how this ending works for you, see if you like it, and see if you want something different. We may never get it at this rate, but I trust George R. R. Martin to, in some form, finish his story. Fingers crossed. I have to be nice to him, but also realistic. And I trust George. In George, we must trust, because he's the only person I trust to tell this story well to completion at this point, because the last guys who tried, I don't think they nailed it. What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite show? And who's your favorite director? The Princess Bride, Mr. Robot, David Fincher. Why are you the second greatest YouTuber ever? Because Girlfriend Reviews came along and really just messed up my streak. You should watch Supernatural and do a review. I disagree. Do you think The Rise of Skywalker had a solid ending to Kylo and Rey's story? I don't think The Rise of Skywalker did anything solid at all, if I'm being honest. I would say, in terms of that language, it would be the most liquid film ever made. But yeah, Kylo Ren was easily the best thing to come out of this new trilogy into becoming Ben Solo as well. That was all, I think, pretty well handled, mostly by Adam Driver's performance, because he brought a lot to that, to a character who was at times somewhat underwritten. The physicality and the voice and the rage you could feel just seething under every word. Adam Driver is my favorite actor by far. He's phenomenal. But yeah, I think in terms of his story, I would say I really liked what The Last Jedi set up in terms of this weird, estranged connection, and I wanted to see more of the Force bond used in an interesting way. And Rise of Skywalker didn't quite drop the ball with that. The way they portrayed it was not as interesting, but still, there was some cool stuff they did with it. But what it really comes down to is when Kylo Ren turned back to the light side, I didn't understand why. That whole sequence was so confusingly edited and structured, and the reshoots were so prominent and yet unclear. Like I know so much of that movie was changed in post, and that fight scene and his turn back just felt so sudden and unmotivated, even with Leia's death, which was handled, I think, very awkwardly, and everything about Leia in that movie was awkward, but that's more of a technical and realistic obstacle than a storytelling one. As for Rey's story, I think making her a Palpatine is the worst thing that ever happened across the entire Star Wars saga, and that includes Solo. And as for their collective story, it really didn't click for me. The ending both those characters got, I thought, really didn't serve their characters at all, especially with The Last Jedi. The Palpatine thing is its own brand of stupid, but Kylo Ren rejected redemption outright, so having him be redeemed, especially on such flimsy ground, was just, I think, the entirely wrong way to approach that character's end. And as for Rey, in a story that was so much about discovering yourself and finding what was special about someone who wasn't part of one of those big families, they completely reversed it, and then a bunch of ghosts she had no interaction with before helped her blow up the Emperor, who we already knew didn't die, so what's happening? And then Rey's story ends on Tatooine, which has always been a place you were trying to escape. Like, Rey had passed that point in her character's journey. Rey had become who she was meant to be. I think the main problem is everything in terms of a one-sentence breakdown in The Rise of Skywalker is fine, but any detail just completely throws the quality out the window. So it's immensely frustrating, and I was really sad to have seen the Skywalker saga, which has meant so much to me, end on a note where I just I sat there in my chair and I felt nothing. I was just so apathetic to everything. It was just let's move on. I'm getting depressed. Do you watch WWE? I will watch it if I'm in a bar having lunch or dinner or a few drinks or something, because it is immensely fun to watch. I'm really not into the storylines at all. I know nothing about any performers, but I have immense respect for them because it's stunt performing, and I have a special place in my heart for good stunt performing, and they're very good at what they do. They're clearly in with the audience. Everyone's just having a great time. Like, it's a very positive thing. I'm sure there's been some behind the scenes drama and some injuries, yes, obviously, but it's such a pure, fun art form that I would love to get into more, but I feel like I'd have way too much catching up to do, so, maybe one day. Like James Bond, maybe one day. I remember a while back you mentioned you really didn't enjoy Venom, and in my personal opinion, I think the movie would have been more entertaining if it was rated R. Do you think this potential change could have saved the movie? Absolutely not. I think the notion that a movie being rated R makes it automatically a good or on some new level of quality is the mindset of a teenager who's just watched their first Tarantino movie. Like, yes, there are some very good R-rated movies out there, but exploring dark themes and having violence and having some rough stuff go down, you don't need to have people cursing and have a ton of blood to make that be effective and good. You can still do that in PG-13, or hell, PG or G. Pixar's done some rough stuff to some kids. There is a time and place for the R rating. It would be in projects like Joker, which are taking a very stylistically unique take on a broad property, but if you're just adapting that property, I would stick to the spirit of it. And yes, Venom has been very violent at times, but they were clearly not trying to make the next, not the next, it came out before, but they weren't trying to make Joker with it. They wanted Venom to be a new franchise. They weren't trying to make a one-off fun little independent film. The problems with Venom are so fundamental and deep and hilarious that making it R would not have fixed them in any stretch of imagination. Not at all. What are your thoughts on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Like James Bond, my thoughts are very limited because I've only seen, I think, 2 episodes in my life. One from the first season, which I thought was just so mediocre it wasn't even worth thinking about, and I haven't since. And that one where the British lady was on the blue planet, or was it blue, or was it green? I can't remember. As you can tell, I'm an expert. Yeah, I just never watched the show. I never particularly cared for it. It didn't do anything for me on a story level. The characters seemed okay. The actors were somewhat charming. It seemed like very generic network TV to me. There's a lot of generic network TV out there, and I try to avoid it because it just doesn't do anything for me. The TV show aspects of the MCU very rarely grabbed me, and even more rarely held my attention for more than a few episodes, so I just think it's something I'm never going to get to, and I feel perfectly fine with that. What got you into writing, and are there any books you'd recommend for people to read? I really don't have a singular point where it started. I always loved reading as a kid, and even now I've started doing it much more again, so making my own stories became just kind of a natural extension of how much story I was absorbing. I wanted to be doing the things I was reading and creating that experience for someone else, so it was very just slow and gradual, and something I was always thinking about, if not specifically doing on paper or on a laptop. In terms of film, it's just the part of the creative process I feel most comfortable with. Just sitting down, imagining people, imagining scenarios, fitting everything together. It's like a puzzle, and making sure everything flows naturally. Dialogue is very important to me, so I have to make sure that's all pretty good. But yeah, there's no right way to do it. I would say there's definitely some wrong ways to do it, but if you're trying to find a format for writing you want to do, try everything, experiment. I certainly have, and I found things I'm very bad at. So you learn those lessons the hard way in that you read your own work and go, this is absolute trash. But then you find something you're really good at and you show it to people and you're proud of it and they say, this is really good. And just once, maybe the voices will go away when you try to sleep. As for books, some really good ones I read recently were the Steve Jobs biography. Fantastic. Recursion and Dark Matter by Blake Crouch are 2 of my favorite books and 2 of the best science fiction books ever written, I would say, easily. Tough Voyaging by George R.R. Martin. It's a one he wrote before Game of Thrones, I believe. It's just a single novel of short stories with one character. So much fun. Also, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is like reading a trippy, artsy, like David Lynchian kind of movie in a book form, which was really unique. And I found I liked that kind of story told on the page way more than on screen. And if you're looking for some good fantasy, I would recommend Kings of the Wild and Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames. Both fantastic, very contemporary, very funny, very self-reflexive takes on that genre. For sure, read those. What is your favorite MCU movie? I usually say Winter Soldier, but lately I've been thinking it's more like the first Guardians movie. I mean, I absolutely adore James Gunn's writing, but the way that movie comes together from basically nothing. Like, the fact that they made such a giant hit off of these nothing characters and built this entire new microcosm in the MCU that became this giant phenomenon was so impressive. I remember seeing it in the theater and just thinking, like, this is the next big thing. This is really gonna hit. And I won't say I was, psychic or anything. It's a really good movie on its own, and it found its legs, it found its audience, and it's still a giant hit independent of the MCU, which is so cool. I'm hoping it will lead to something of a science fiction renaissance because, I love me some Star Wars. I love me some Guardians. I would love to see some big, unique, new space operas come out of nowhere. The only problem is getting studios to commit a significant budget to them to make them actually look that good. And I understand the hesitation because of things like Jupiter Ascending, but all we need is one good big hit, and we can make that genre huge again. What do you think of Thanos as a character in the MCU? Honestly, to me, he's always been a somewhat overrated character. He's certainly not a bad villain or even a very generic one. He's definitely memorable, only because they built him up so much, but he's also on his own, in his appearances, in his cadence, his manner, his look. It's very memorable, and I enjoy watching him face off with the Avengers. I just feel like the fact that they made him so crazy as like a primary character trait kind of took away from some of the interesting things you could have done. He's just kind of another crazy guy when you really think about it. The fact that they let him get away with his doomsday genocide plan makes his character hit a lot harder, makes that threat feel way more real. But then you have Endgame, where they bring back this previous version who has no history with the Avengers or little to no history, so facing off against that version, I think, made that finale a little limp, because it wasn't them fighting the Thanos they knew, it was just them fighting some guy. So I would say, in terms of where Thanos' story ended, the filmmakers bit off just a bit more than they could chew for the sake of surprise, but yeah, he's gonna go down as one of the best Marvel villains. I wouldn't call him the best, or even one of my favorites, but he's good. He works. And after the decade of build-up they gave him working was the most important part. So definitely an accomplishment. Thoughts on the Marvel Phase 4 lineup? I don't care at all. When you watch a film or television show, what exactly is going on in your mind? Are you analyzing it as a critic, or are you just trying to enjoy it? I like to think that I'm just trying to enjoy it, but I know part of me is always deconstructing and analyzing, which is not a brag. It's actually quite annoying, because I miss just being able to watch things normally. If I'm watching something for the sake of it being so bad it's good, then I can just kind of go along for the ride. But if it's something I want to actually engage with on an analytical level, then the primary thing I look at is story and dialogue and just the writing. That's, like I said, my favorite part, and it always jumps out to me. Recently, I've started watching things more from an editing perspective and trying to get a sense of timing and just the precision of editing at times is very impressive to me, and something I'm trying to hone on a personal level. And then, you have things like acting and directing and pacing, and that stuff comes later, in the big picture. That's more of a, when something's done, I think about that stuff. When it comes to doing both, I usually sink into a mode of just enjoying something once it's grabbed me with those analytical elements being intact, or at least being to my taste. If it's a movie, it could take 10 minutes, it could take half an hour, it could take the entire time for me to fully get what a thing is trying to say, or what a filmmaker is trying to say, you know what I mean? I don't consider myself to be a critic, just a very opinionated person, and I think because I've devoted so much time to critically analyzing things, I'm inevitably going to do that by default, which annoys me and helps me appreciate the things I really love. Thoughts on Cats? I have nothing but thoughts on Cats. Cats may be the best movie I've ever seen in my entire life. I saw it 4 times when it was in theaters. I was sober for 3 of them. And I actually hosted a 60-person screening of Cats at my local theater. Me and a bunch of friends, we went in, we bought out the theater, we had a great time, we laughed, we screamed, we sang along. During the Mr. Mistopheles number, I got up and started clapping and dancing around. Everyone was getting really into it. It has a very Rocky Horror Picture Show vibe, and I hope that's where it goes in the future, because it is absolutely a movie that should be watched with a group of friends in let's say various stages of sobriety. But yes, I will be making a big video on Cats in hopefully the near future. I'm not quite sure, because it will be enormous and sprawling, because frankly, I could talk about cats for hours, and I just might. And for our final question, what are your plans for the channel? This is an excellent question and very pertinent to how I'm approaching content this year in particular. I want to treat 2020 as sort of a new chapter because recently I went back and I rewatched my Black Mirror video and I just absolutely hated it. Like I hated it. I hated what I was saying. I hated the arguments I was making. They felt so shallow and hollow, and I could feel myself pushing negativity for something that I'm generally kind of ambivalent about. I just enjoy the show when it comes out or don't and then move on. But I feel like committing that much focus and negative energy to something, it started to pollute the rest of my life. I started to become a person I really didn't like being. I felt like getting more critical and just being more of a prick in general, and that didn't really feel great. So what I'm trying to do, as I've kind of rediscovered my love for creating in terms of film and storytelling, is I want to push my content in a more positive, celebratory direction. I'll still be critical. I'll still make fun of bad things because it's fun to do. But I don't want that to be the focus. I don't want that to be the vibe I put out there because I enjoy watching stuff and making stuff. And I think in rediscovering my love of filmmaking, I want to put that out there into the world as my general vibe, and as opposed to being another guy who is bitching over clips of a bad TV show and is just in his room talking for hours on end. I do that anyway, but the point still stands. I was starting to feel embarrassed about the content I was putting out there. I felt embarrassed about the way I was being in my videos because I felt it wasn't very genuine as to who I am, and I want to find that in my content. I want to be more like who I feel like I am in my videos in terms of perspective and analysis. I don't want to feel like I'm putting anything on because a video will sell better to an audience, and that is the YouTube conundrum. The reason why I made that Black Mirror video wasn't really out of any strong passion or hatred. It was because I figured the video would do well and I was a bit mad at the time. But during the whole creative process of making that video, I got less mad, and anger isn't an emotion I want to linger on when I have to work on something for months because it makes everything around it feel worse. There is a time and place and definitely a big audience for the I hate everything style of content, and not the creator specifically, but that genre, and that's not the mold I want to fit into. I want to find something more unique and personal. So hopefully this year I can find that with new video subjects, new approaches, and just having more fun. And hopefully that works out for all of you. Hopefully you like those videos, and hopefully you're on board to watch me through the rest of the year. And if not, sorry, but this is free entertainment, so, you get what you get. For those of you who have stuck around this far and will continue to stick around, thank you very much for watching not only this video, but for all my videos. And I hope you like what I have to say in the future, because I'm very excited about this year, and I'm hoping to make it a good one. So that is it for this year's Q&A. Thank you very much to everyone who submitted questions. If you submitted one and didn't see an answer, it's because I answered it in another question, or it just wasn't a very good question, and that's just reality. And now I must pack up my camera and return to only the voice realm, because doing this stuff on camera makes me horrendously uncomfortable. I am so sweaty right now, I just want to die.